Well, it's a great pleasure to have Charlie Norris with us today. Charlie and I actually go back a long time together. We've known each other, I think, since 1975, when we were both in 3 Commando at the same time, and our paths intersected for a short time. And then later, when Charlie moved to Cape Town, we became friends. And Charlie, it's really a privilege and an honor to have you here, brother, and to hear your interesting story about your time in the Rhodesian Army during the Bush War. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? You have quite an interesting background, the history of your family and the farm, and Cecil John Rhodes and all that, and your schooling, and how you ended up in the army.
Yes, yeah. Well, John, I was born in Umtali, which is now Mutari, and my family had a farm just past the showgrounds, beneath Victoria's Rock. That big Gorba on Christmas past with the big cliff face. That was our top land.
Sure.
And the farm was given to my great-grandfather by Cecil John Rhodes, who my great-grandfather worked for a long time. He was his valet in Rhodesia in Cape Town, and then accompanied Rhodes up to Rhodesia. And he first was in Inyanga running the Rhodes estates there, and then that was given to him as well. I believe he lost that in a poker game, but I'm not too sure about the credibility of that story. But then he built up Devonshire Farm into one of the top dairy farms in the country. And then that was passed down from generation to generation. Me being the eldest grandson of the 4th generation, or the eldest son, should I say. But what happened there is, when I was about 18 months old, all the cattle, just about the whole herd, was wiped out by arsenic poison in the Sakuva River. And my old man turned to the bottle, and my mum couldn't put up with him, so they actually got divorced. And so I lived with her until I was about 5, when she met my late stepdad, Randy Clark, and married him. Randy was working for Connex. He was an agronomist, and we lived in Bordervale, just below the high school. I had a normal sort of childhood, albeit from a broken home, but I've got very fond memories of our time living in Umtali, in Bordervale. And I basically stayed there until the end of Form 1. Randy and my old lady moved to Salisbury. He got a new position there, and I finished Form 1 staying with a friend, and then moved up to Salisbury and went to Mount Pleasant in Form 2. But it didn't end there. My schooling then changed again. As part of the divorce settlement, it was agreed that when I was of high school age, that I would go to boarding school. And so in Form 3, my old man insisted that I go to boarding school, and I went to Jamison High in Kachuma, which is another period of my life that I really loved. It was great being a boarder, and I just loved the school. Unfortunately, my old man stopped paying my school fees. Randy wasn't going to pick them up, and so I had to leave Jamison in the 3rd term of Form 3 and went back to Mount Pleasant, where I stayed until the end of Form 4, and at which time my mum had separated from Randy, and I was living with her in Avondale. And my cousin, Rob Holmes, had joined the SAS about 8-9 months before. And after listening to all these war stories, I thought, well, I'm not really interested in school. I hated Mount Pleasant. Let me join the army. So at 16 and a half, I remember my mom picked me up from my cousin's house after work the one day, and on the way home, I told her I was joining the army. She wasn't very pleased, but she let me. And I had these grand ideas of joining the SAS and becoming a hairy-arsed lady soldier there. the problem was at that stage I looked about 12. So when I went to the SAS, I insisted that I talked the recruiting officer into sending me there. And I remember a story that came out of that was that when I went up for lunch to the troopies mess, all the troopies thought I was one of the officers' sons because I was in brand new camouflage, and they all thought I belonged to one of the officers. Needless to say, my experience with the SAS was to be short-lived. I was nowhere get up for what it took then to pass out and to work with them. And so what happened then is they sent me to service corps, and I started doing an apprenticeship as a motor mechanic at KG6. It's something I hated every moment of. Anyway, I stuck it out for a bit, and there was about 6 of us on the same intake, and we were sent down to Llewellyn Barracks to go to the Polytech in Bulawayo. And so that's what I did. We commuted every day from Llewellyn into Bulawayo. And at the beginning of the second term, we had a meeting before the course restarted. And our instructor said, is anybody here that doesn't think this is the job for him? So, of course, I put up my hand, went back to Llewellyn Barracks, was charged. I think it's under Section 39, where they haven't got a specific charge for you. They just use that section to generally charge you. So I was charged. I was fined $10 and sent to the RLI, which was to my delight. I was really pleased about that. And basically, why the RLI? There was a couple of instructors, ex-RLI, still bashed RLI, working at it. Joe Wiper, Ian Rose. I forget the other buggers, but they would tell me their war stories, and of course, this sounded like really exciting. And so so then I went to RLI. That must have been. I joined in '73. That must have been. It was towards the end of '74. I can't remember if it was October or November. Anyway, I went to RLI, 2 training troop, and course 141 was just in their coin phase. And I was a waster there waiting for my recruit course to start, which would be 142. And so did the normal stuff a waster does, just basically, I think the word sum it up, a waster. And then I joined course 142. Our main instructor was Derek Taylor, and Clive Larrett was an instructor as well. Anyway, that course started okay, but then the one night Clive Larrett gave us a huge rev. He ran us into the ground, and I got a fatigue fracture of my right leg. I didn't know it was a fatigue fracture at the time. I just couldn't walk properly. Oh, I became a waster again, and when 143 went on their coin phase, Captain Cooper and Moose decided that I could join that course and pass out with them. So that's what I did. I passed out with 143 and was sent to 3 Commander, which was to my delight because Trevor Schultz was a very good friend of mine, and he had gone to 3 Commander. I can't remember. I must have asked to go to 3 Commander in hindsight. And I went to 3 Commander and joined the 11 Troop.
Yeah, sorry, Charlie. Before we get on to 3 Commander, going back to training troop, I was course 140. So when I was there, the chief instructor was Sergeant Richard Atkinson, and training troop was being run by Robin Tarr. So I suppose Captain Cooper had taken over by the time you got there?
Yeah, and Atkinson wasn't there either. I forget who the senior instructor was, but Derek Taylor was a sergeant, and he definitely was our course instructor.
Right.
Together with Clive Larrett. Clive was a full corporal at that stage.
Yeah. Any other interesting guys pass out with you, Charlie? Names that stand out?
Dave Roberts. Gosh, I'm trying to think now. I've gone blank. I'll remember as we go on.
Yeah,
It was a
yeah.
small course, though. There was only about 12 of us on that course. It was a very small course. Yeah.
Okay, well, that is small. Yeah, yeah. I had some interesting guys pass out with me, like like Charlie Warren and Matt Lamb and
Oh,
Harry.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no, Harry Fowle passed out. I think he was 138. But Graham Peake, who later
Yeah.
joined
Passed
SAS.
away, yeah.
Yeah, he's passed away recently. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. So carry on.
No,
So
no, no.
you joined 3 Commando, and I believe you went into 11 Troop, eh?
That's right. And yeah, the story of my life is full of bloody ups and downs. When I joined 3 Commando, I think I was overkeen and tried to do everything too well or too quickly. And I just didn't click, For starters, on the first 5-4 call out we did, and John Norman was my stick leader, we had to sleep out the night, and I promptly fell asleep on guard and got caught. So basically, Johnny Norman said, "Look, you're on a charge, but at that time, if you were charged for anything while you were in the bush, they would wait until you got back for R&R before you went on orders." Needless to say, that happened. I went on orders, and I got 21 days DB.
Sure.
To Brady Barracks. Why I
Was
didn't
that?
get 28, I don't know, but
Yeah.
that was a real eye-opener and something I'll never forget.
Was that Major Doug Lambert that you went in front of?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was. Oh no, hang on a second. No, for some reason he didn't take it. It was a 2RC. Gosh, I'm just trying to think of his name.
Dixon.
He's still around.
Dixon?
No, not Dixon. Before
Scott?
Johnny Dixon's time. No,
Kip Donald.
Kipper. Yeah, Kip
Kip Donald.
Yeah. So I was double marched down to the guard room and presented with an RP escort and a train ticket, and on my way to Brady Barracks. And that was hard work.
Sure.
Both Johnny Pretorius and Chris Pretorius was running the place.
Yeah.
And it was what everybody said it was going to be. It was sheer bloody hell.
Tell us a little bit about DB, Charlie. Is it just lots of PT all day long and doubling with up and down?
Basically, it's funny when you arrive at the station and get picked up by the MPs. Everybody is really nice to you, and you think, well, this isn't too bad. And then when you arrive, they march you to the outside the door of the office block, and they sort of leave you there for about 10 minutes to think about this. And then I remember old Johnny Pretorius came flying out the door and just started shouting and screaming at me for about 5 minutes. And I thought, what the hell's wrong with this guy? And then I was marking time, double time, and he was going to do this, and I'll never see the ROI again. And yeah, it was terrible. And the first thing I did was cut all my hair off. And anyway, once that was done, I was double marched up to the cell block and joined my fellow inmates. I forget how many there were of us. Black and white were mixed together. And there must have been about 50 of us, I think, in DB at that time. And basically, the day went something like this. You got up not too early, funny enough. You'd think you'd get up at like 4 o'clock or something, but you didn't. We got up at 6, I think. Then we could shave and shampoo. And then it was breakfast, and you were double marched down to the dining room, but you ate your breakfast standing in 3 ranks. So you had to eat your breakfast like that and have your tea. Then it was time for inspection, and you had to put on your best kit, not greens, but full drill kit. And they would inspect you and your cell or cells. There's either 1 or 3 people in a cell. They'd never let just 2 be in a cell. It had to be 1 or 3. And then you would stand outside your cell, and Chris Pretorius would come around, and as he came past, you had to shout out your number, rank, and name. And then he would just abuse you for however long he felt like it. If you were lucky, for 30 seconds, if you're unlucky, for 5 minutes, and then move on to the next bugger. Once that was over, you put on your fatigues, and you do an hour of drill on the double, and an hour of drill in marching. And then after drill, they had a one-man assault course, so you didn't have to have assistance to get over any obstacles. One man could do it alone. And you just went round and round and round doing that for, I don't know, about an hour. At which time it was pretty close to lunchtime, and you were marched, or double marched down to the, everything was on the double, and you couldn't talk, you had to scream. There was no in between. And I must say that the food there was very good. I think they, like you had two starters, you got potatoes and rice. I think because we burned so many calories, they had to feed us well, you know. Then after lunch, you went back to the cell block where you allowed a cigarette. You were only allowed, I think, 5 cigarettes a day. And after lunch, you'd go and do manual labor somewhere. When I was there, we had to remove the butts of a range with buckets and sieve the soil to get the heads out of the soil. And then once that was finished, we had to put all the soil back. So that was our task while I was there. Although at the time it seemed to take forever, the 21 days went pretty quickly. And no sooner I got there, I was on the train back to Cranwell Barracks, and it was over. Back to the commando, all was forgiven. That's one thing, you know, when you were in trouble and you were punished, they didn't hold it against you. So I went back to 11 Troop and carried on. And in those days, in 75, the war wasn't all that hot. And I think in the beginning, we just did bush trips, patrolling and doing OPs and that sort of thing. I think Fire Force, I'm open to correction, only came in late in 75. And when we started Fire Force, I remember we used to rotate. So each commander took a turn, and then the other 2 bush trips were deployed bush trip. And as such, I remember quite well Pichanza Keep, Rushinga, where else as a deployed. Now, I think all my deployed, Centenary, all my deployed bush trips were in the Hurricane area. I only went to Matoko, Thrasher, and Repulse once Fire Force started.
Pungwi, Marewa?
Yeah, Pungwi, Hondi Valley, yes, we did.
No, Fungwi.
Oh, Pungwi. No, I don't remember that, John. Where was that?
Yeah. Near Matoko, Marewa, that area, you know.
Oh, yeah, I just don't remember the name, Fungwi.
Yeah. Charlie, just to correct you there, when I joined the commando in 74, we were doing Fire Force. And when when Hannes Wessels joined 2 Commando in 73, they were already doing Fire Force. So
okay. Well, then I'm wrong. It must have been we did Fire Force, but we didn't do it constantly. One Fire Force, and then you were deployed for the next one.
Yeah.
I think when did we start doing Fire Force continuously? Do you remember? Was it 76?
I think it was 76, Charlie. And okay. when we were doing Fire Force in 75, like at Jock Darwin, I remember we used to have one day first wave, one day you were second wave, and one day you were off.
That's right. Yeah. I remember that now.
And a lot. I would say about 4 out of every 5 call-outs was a lemon.
Yes, that's right. I remember that. But it was all great fun, and of course, you know, when we were in the bush, we would look forward to R&R, and then when we were in R&R, we'd look forward to going back to the bush. It was weird.
Yeah. So you got promoted to Lance Corporal?
Yeah. So what happened was, when I got back to the commander after DB, I clicked, and I fitted in with everything and everybody. And it was actually soon after that that I was promoted to Lance Corporal. I remember we were near in the Hondi Valley, near the tea estates at the time. And if I'm correct, it was Johnny Norman that called me in and said, "Look, you've been promoted to Lance Corporal." Much to the horror of all the guys in the 11 trip, especially people like Trevor Schultz and Graham Van Buljan. "Oh, Corporal Norris," pulling the fist. But it soon all settled down, and I was a lance man. And the 76 to 79 is a bit of a blur. We were, as you know, constantly on fire force, but I did a few courses in between. I went on drill and weapons course to the School of Inf, which I think it was either 8 or 10 weeks. And I really enjoyed that. Funny enough, I enjoyed the drill phase more than the weapons phase. It was a great course. And of course, that qualified me as an instructor. And the other course I did was junior attack course, also at the School of Inf.
Yeah.
And that was also a nice course. So
tell us about your para course, Charlie.
What happened there was, after my first 3 years, I left the army, and I went and worked for Old Mutual Fire in General for 3 months. But what happened was I wasn't happy. And the guys would come back from the bush, and of course I'd hook up with them. And I was with my mates and hearing their war stories, and I just decided to join the army again. So I did that and went back to 3 Commando, but on arrival there, I was sent to 14 Troop, not 11 Troop.
Right.
And we were Fire Force at Mount Darwin, and I'd only been there for, I don't think it was even a week when 14 Troop and 11 Troop went back to Salisbury to do paracourse. But pre-paracourse, we had to do PT twice a day with Len Monson to get fit for the course. And so we sort of did that morning and afternoon, and then the rest of the time we were free to do what we wanted, which was quite nice. And the PT, I don't know if we were just fitter and stronger then or what, but the PT wasn't that bad. And then we started the exciting paracourse. I mean, we were over the moon. And I did my paracourse at New Serum with 11 Troop. And I think once again, Johnny Norman was in my life all the time. I'm sure he was on the same course as us. I'm sure he did paracourse with us. That went by without incident. I remember we did have one incident on paracourse. That was Dave Simpson. His parachute didn't open properly and he had to put his reserve. And it was actually on our container jump. So he was hurtling towards the ground a lot faster than he should have been, but he hadn't released his container. So he pulled his reserve, which deployed, and he landed with the container strapped to his body, or to his waist and legs. And he sort of scratched his head and got up, and there was nothing wrong with him. So that springs to mind. But other than that, and the excitement of jumping out of an airplane, the paracourse basically went without incident. Yeah. But what happened was when we got back to the Commando, only 11 and 14 Trip were trained as paras. So we were paras all the time. We were never in the G cars. And as such, and because of that, we got quite a few op jumps under our belts. Fergie O'Brien, who I know you've interviewed, he actually was my machine gunner for 2 years. I'll talk about him later. I've lost my train of thought.
Little Chris Bernard on your paracourse?
Yeah, he was in 14 Troop, yeah. He was in 14 Troop, yeah.
Martin Geldernes. I'm just trying to think of the guys that would,
Martin Geldernes. Oh yeah, sorry, Fergus O'Brien did the most op jumps in 3 Commander. I think he had 33 that he did op jumps.
Right.
I did about 30, 31. But yeah, so we were continually parrots, and it took 13 and 12 to quite a while. There's quite a big gap between us doing para course and them. And so, as I said, we got quite a few jumps under our belts. And then at that stage, the war started picking up. But it's a bit of a blur because it was just sirens going, call outs back, R&R. I've lost a lot of detail in my memory.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the next big thing that happened in 77 was turmoil. We were Fire Force at Grand Reef at the time, and we had to fall in, and we were told that we were going back to barracks, and they wouldn't tell us why. And when we got back to Cranbourne, we were told that we were going to do a high density op in the Hurricane area. And that it was going to be a very big one. And that's the reason we're not doing Fire Force. And then we had to carry 10 magazines, and we had to put our blood groups on our clothing. And when that happened, and the machine gunners had to carry, I think they normally carry 10 belts, John, is that right?
Yes.
Imagine, yeah, I think they had to carry more than that. And we just knew that there was something going on. And then it finally became knowledge was when we formed up in a convoy and drove out of the barracks. Instead of turning right, which would have taken us anywhere in Rhodesia, we turned left. And there's only one way left wing on the airport road, and that was New Serum.
Yeah.
So we knew then that we were going to do the external. When we got there, SAS were there, and I remember walking into the para hangar, and although I didn't count them at the time, there was 144 parachutes laid out on the floor. And we thought, shit, what's going on here? Anyway, we were taken to the sports club, the Air Force Sports Club, to billet for the night. And as I said, SAS were there as well. But early in the evening, we went back to the hangar where Brown Robinson gave orders. And I remember they had a model of the target area, which was covered in air photos, but like with paper mache underneath. So you had a 3-dimensional view of the target area. And then I just remember him rattling off the figures and the number of CTs that were in the camp. We knew we were going to take this on, Commander. So I think the combined force that jumped and was chopping in there must have been, will be 140, about 250 guys that took on potentially 5,000. I remember nipping. I remember flying there in the deck and looking out the windows and seeing the other decks in formation. I remember Percy Hodgson coming up to me in the plane just before we stood up, hooked up and checked equipment, and shook my hand, and we wished each other good luck. And then we jumped. And I remember as my chute opened, I saw a hunter pulling out of an attack. And there was a hell of a lot of small arms fire, but I must say, not a hell of a lot coming our way. And we landed and regrouped, and 3 Commandos' target was actually the headquarters of the camp, of the complex, where all the big knobs were supposed to be, including Mugabe was supposed to have been there. And we regrouped, got into an extended line, sweep line, and started making our way towards the target area. Obviously, at this time, there's Horndal going on all around us, and the KCARs are firing, and yeah. But as I said, not a hell of a lot came our way until Johnny Norman again. They had a punch up, and the KCAR went to assist and gave them a snot squirt, and Johnny was wounded. I think it was Pete Donnelly was wounded. I forget who else.
Can I just
But
cut in there, Charlie?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, apparently, I spoke to Johnny about this, and apparently, they were under a canopy of trees when the K car
Okay,
fired through the canopy of trees, and there was an airburst from the 20
okay,
mil, and shrapnel
okay,
came down. John is not sure whether the shrapnel hit the ground and then bounced up into him, or whether he was
okay,
hit from the airburst. But essentially, what happened is that it took out his left foot, and he lost a toe on his left foot, and it also severed his Achilles tendon on his left foot, and then went up
okay,
into his leg. He needed skin grafts in his leg, and then it carried on traveling up or down. He's not sure the order of things, but it hit the left side of his face and sort of grazed his left eye, and I think exited at the sort of eye socket type of area. Yeah, and then he said there was quite a few guys who were down, and he said they had to wait over an hour to get casevaced.
yeah, yeah, that's obviously right. I can't remember the detail, but I remember once they were casevaced, we carried on and basically swept towards the HQ and into the HQ complex itself, but there was nobody there. They had all gapped it. There were still structures standing. I remember there was a brick building there. There's lots of the normal huts and so forth, with a hell of a lot of kit. I mean, they had hi-fi players and TVs and all sorts of stuff. I remember there was a small tree just standing there, and there was a bugger that had climbed into a Hessian sack and sat in the tree with a sack around him. And we pulled him out. And then on if you're taking the target area as being north, on the east side of the target area was a plowed field. And I remember we were standing around looking at all the stuff that we would dearly like to loot. And a lone goo came running, and it looked like he had just run 30 Ks. He was sweating, and you could see he was buggered, carrying SKS. And I remember, I don't know who shot him, but one of the guys just shot him. But other than that, nothing happened. There was, as I said, there was nobody there. So once we had cleared that part of the camp, it was getting towards last light when we were told we were spending the night there. We weren't going back. And so we formed up in a sort of defensive position, still very mindful that tanks might be on their way. But once again, the night went without incident, and the next day we were chopped out. We were picked up and taken out.
Yeah, was Fergus O'Brien with you at Chimoio? Okay.
I can't remember, John. And in thinking, I actually can't remember when he joined us. But what I do know is that he carried the gun, and here's my gunner for. It might not have been 2 years, but certainly for a hell of a long time. He was brilliant, you know.
Yeah.
You know, mad as a hatter, but brilliant. Good soldier. Yeah, he took no prisoners off Fergie. He was unreal.
Mike Arolski, was he also 14 troop or?
No, Mike, actually, I shared a house with Mike in East London for a few years. What happened to Mike is on recruit course, they picked a few guys to become instructors. And he was one of those. And so straight from recruit course, he went to the School of Infantry Drill and Weapons, went back to training troop. And he only joined the commando in June 79. In fact, his first day in the bush was the day I got shot. And he was actually in my stick. He was next to me. And I remember as I went down, he did like a breakdance because his rifle took a few rounds and knocked him about. But yeah, he was in 14 troop, but he only joined us in about May, June 79.
Right.
Good bugger.
Okay, so what happened after Chimoio, Charlie?
As I recall, we just went back to Fire Force. There was a few small ops we did into Mozambique. I I can't remember the exact time. The one op I did was with Mark Adams. We were Fire Force at Motoko, and he was given a task to go to Opia, the main road from Yamapanda. I don't know if that Yamapanda road went to Chimoyo or where it went, but anyway, we were about how far in? We were probably about 15 k's in, and basically Bruce Nalgo said to Mark, "You can handpick your guys for this op." There was to be 6 of us, and he was 12 troop, and I was obviously in 14 troop. I think I was a full corporal then. Yeah, he picked myself, Terry Hammond, Derek Taylor, Peter Watts. How many is that? Derek Taylor, myself, Peter Watts, Hammond. Yeah, that's 6 of us. Yeah, and it was a pseudo op, so we were in Freddy kit. I remember I carried the heavy barreled AK, and funny enough, the chopper that took us in, we had full Bergens. I think we were going to be there for about 10 days. And I remember that 6 of us squeezed into a G-car to get deployed. And the G-car had to use the runway to take off with the nose wheel to get enough power to lift off. But what happened there was we were dropped at last light. I remember as we were dropped, an SAS stick was picked up. And I remember Johnny Haynes was one of the guys in the SAS stick. I knew Johnny from my cousin's days in the SAS. And we made our way to our OP, and we walked in that night. And the next day, I remember we put out mini claymores in defense, and anyway, we were sitting in our OP position when a fire started just behind where the mini claymores were. And we saw a bugger, a local. I remember just seeing his white shirt. And Mark Adams said to me, "Norris, go and get the claymores down." And I thought, shit now. And I'm thinking of the flames close to the claymores and the heat setting them off, you know. But it was just a glancing thought. And then I made my way and picked up the mini claymores. So we were obviously compromised. And at that time of the war, I think it was common knowledge that Frima had their own version of Fire Force, which was a land-based quick reaction force to deal with this sort of thing. Obviously, they had no aircraft, but we were compromised, and we were told that there was guys coming to look for us. So we made our way out again, and to find a suitable place for the chopper to pick us up. I remember while we were waiting for airlift, we were on a rocky outcrop, and Mark Adams had LM radio tuned into the TL-48, and he said, "Come here," and I went there and through the earphones, it was LM radio, and I remember him saying to Derek Taylor, "Come listen," and Derek wasn't happy about this, the fact that we were in the shit in Mozambique, and these 2 buggers are listening to the radio, So anyway, we were picked up late that afternoon and flown back without any incident. But what I wanted to mention is, whilst I did drill and weapons and tac course, I missed a few externals. I think Rammer 9 was one of them. And then the only other one I did besides Op Tepid and the second Chimoyo was when Chappie Rosenfeld was killed. We were Fire Force Grand Reef, and we were called to go and hit a camp just across the border, in fact. And I remember we were flown there in the DAC, and we weren't going to para in for some reason, and we went in by chopper. But that day we were actually dropped in the minefield. My stick was dropped in the minefield, and having been dropped off, I forget, somebody just pointed out that, hey, look, those buggers have been dropped in the minefield. Somebody saw us being dropped and brought their attention to the cackle and said, look, you've just dropped a stick in the minefield. So we were picked up straight away and taken off. But that day, Fergie was in my stick, Fergie O'Brien, and Chappie Rosenfeld had his punch up where he was killed, and I think Frank Battaglia. And so that happened that day. And my stick, I forget, we were with another stick or two. It was a Frelimo camp, and Fergus and I found the armory. And of course, we always wanted a Togorov. And I remember I said to Fergus, you stand here. I went in and I closed and bolted the door so nobody could come in. So I had first pick. And I found a Togorov. And I remember the guys weren't tough because, I had the pistol. At that stage, we weren't, well, not to my knowledge, we weren't pinching AKs and that sort of thing. And then I remember we threw a couple of bunker bombs in there to make a mess of all the weapons and stuff that we didn't recover. So that was a little external I did. And then, as I said, it was just basically in and out of the bush on Fire Force. The next big op was Op Miracle. That was Chumail 2.
Yeah.
That's when Bruce Noble was killed. Yeah, we were deployed to Lake Alex. We knew we were going on the external. It wasn't as hush-hush as the first one. And we grouped up at Lake Alexander. I was a sergeant at this stage. And basically what happened was they were doing mock 5/4 call-outs to take attention away from doing any external. So they would, I think it was Cocky Bennett in the links would just see what looked like a camp, and we would do a 5/4 scene on the camp just to take tension away from the border, I think. And I remember Brian Lewis was there. He was our CQ. And the one morning, Bruce Noble said to me, look, organize some snacks. The Blue Jobs are coming for tea. And if I remember correctly, Paddy Bate, who was the pilot on that aircraft, flew in from Salisbury that day. And I think there was already G cars there, but another two arrived, one with Paddy Bate. And then they had their tea, and then, I remember Major Snell was saying, okay, well, let's go, And as he said that, a whole bunch of us walked down. There's like a road that went down into the lake, and we went down for a swim. And that's what we were swimming. And I remember the RSM come running down the road, shouting, medic, medic. And I looked up, and the other guys obviously looked up as well, and we could see smoke in the distance. And and the chopper had gone down. So it was a very, very sad day for 3 Commander, because 99.9% of the guys in 3 Commander just adored Bruce Noble. He was unreal, fantastic. And at that stage, Bobby Harrison and Noel Smee had just joined the Commander, fresh out of School of Imp. And with Major Snowball going, it was basically Bobby and Noel Smee that were going to take us in. And the CDNCOs got together because we weren't happy with it, because these guys were really fresh. And so what Paddy Bate did was, who was the CEO at the time, he got Dave Greenhouse, who had been moved as intelligence officer. So Dave came back to the commander for that op. And on that op, Dave and 13 and 12 troops were to be the ambush on the main access road to the camp, about 15 clicks south of the camp. And myself and 3 other buggers were chosen to be early warning. So I was a stick of 4, and we were dropped on a Gormal just adjacent to the road, the main access road. And then once again, the 4 of us sat on the Gormal during the day of the attack and heard all the rumblings and the fire and all sorts coming from like 15 k's away. And, for our entertainment, there was birds singing in the trees, and it was quite lekker. We had it really easy. And then night fell, and we did the usual, one guy on guard and the other 3 sleeping. and bugger me if at about 3:30 in the morning, one of the guys, like Lorne Knox, actually was in my stick then. I forget the other buggers. And somebody woke me up and said, Sarge, there's a column coming. And I sat up and I could hear it, you know. And the only thing I can say about tanks, John, is that the noise they make with their tracks and their engine and everything is exactly like you see in the movies. So it's just like the movies. And they came closer and closer. And what they did is they got into an extended line facing the target area, just below the Goma we were on. And obviously before that, I'd got onto the radio to David Benos and I said, sir, there's a column coming. And I remember he said, fuck off, Norris. And as he said that, so he heard it himself. So they just lay low because Frelimo knew that there was an ambush or something close by, but they didn't know exactly where. So they opened up with small arms and 12-7s and whatever they had, but they were just firing indiscriminately. They didn't know where Dave and the buggers were. And of course, the tanks were firing towards the target area. So what happened was, at that stage, besides Dave Benos, the only person I had comms with was Ron Rudali, who was on the top of some boom or somewhere, you know, as part of the command of the op. And relaying through him to artillery, we called artillery on and just said maximum range far south on the road, and that's what they did. And their fire was actually quite effective. Certainly effective enough to get Frelimo moving again. And yeah, the tanks started up and they pulled out as first light was breaking. And below, on the north access roads, there's a road running east and southeast. So there's like a junction. And on the southeast road, the road they came up and exited on, there was these trees. They gave a perfect canopy. So there was no way as aircraft could have seen them anyway because of their cover. I remember thinking about trying to call hunters in, but I'd forgotten that the Blues first light is an hour after our first light. So they couldn't do anything anyway. And after that, so I can't remember, but we didn't know how far they'd got, whether they had stopped for fear of aircraft or what. But a Land Rover appeared with the driver and a passenger and four gooks in the back. And they were at the junction and they were looking around and I'm not sure what they were doing. And then they disappeared into the bush. And I remember I called the Lynx in and the Lynx franned it and destroyed the Land Rover. But we didn't, none of the gooks were killed in that. And so that was basically op miracle for me. I didn't do anything else. I was just the early warning. And then, so it must have been 12 and 13 troops that were the ambush, which left 14 and 11 in the sweep line at the target area. And those buggers had Hondo, I know that, but as I said, I was 15 k's away. Sure. And then after that, it was back to fire force as per normal, which took us getting close to 79, by which time the war was really hotting up. As opposed to in the late 70s, 77, 76, where you were lucky if you got 2 or 3 call-outs a week. We were getting like 3 call-outs a day. And it was hard to choose, for the OC to choose which one to go to, I remember we did 3 jumps the one day, although one was a fun jump. We were at Motoko and I forget who was OC at the time, must have been Bruce Nago, organized to do a fun jump at 3,000 feet, which was great. And then basically that day we had 2 further call-outs, which we jumped into, one to Marewa and one to Inyaga North. In June 79, Snalga was still alive. That's right. But I'll tell you why. I remember it was a Sunday and we had just had a new intake of guys from training troop. And we left for Darwin on a Sunday, and Major Snellville asked me to drive him. I think he had a Babalas. So I drove his Land Rover, and we were at the front of the convoy. And then when we got to Bandura, he said, okay, put foot, let's go. We're going to go on ahead now. And the convoy can come as they are. And when we arrived at Darwin, just next to the fort, the Scouts fort, Freddie Watts, we were relieving one commander. Freddie Watts was standing in the road, waving his arms and madly for us to stop. And I remember he came around to Bruce's side of the vehicle and said, look, I've got 3 call-outs for you. And I thought, oh, shit. Because I hated doing anything the first day. I like to go to the bush, to find out where I was going to be sleeping, to organize my spot, to orientate with my surroundings. And then the next day the war could start. Then I was happy. But as I said, we had 3 call-outs and we were para. If I'm correct, we were called out to 120. And we jumped in, and I had 3 sticks with me, or 2 other sticks and my stick. And we were sweeping north on a river. And this was in the Mavuradona near the Bull's Nose. That's where we were at. And what happened was we had a few contacts, and we had killed about 4, I think. And I was on the western side of the river, and there was 2 sticks. Pugsley Gibson was the one stick leader. I don't know who the other one was. I can't remember. But I was the senior call sign. So I said to Major Snell, I said, look, let me go onto the other side of the river with the bigger bunch of guys and let one of the sticks take my place. And he said, no, all of you stay on the east side of the river. So that was fine. And when we crossed the river, I noticed that one of the guys was like carrying 3 AKs and another guy was carrying an RPG. And I said to the guys, okay, look, just stop here. Let's redistribute those weapons. So, one guy can carry an AK and so on. It's not weighed down by all these captured weapons. Shit. Well, what happened after that was, Sargo said, carry on sweeping. You'll sweep to a re-entrant. When you get to the re-entrant, turn right and carry on your sweep, pick up the chutes, and we'll go home. Well, I took 1 step, and I remember as I stepped off, something caught my eye to the left-hand side, and I remember seeing a white handbag. And as I registered it was a white handbag, so they opened up the Gurks in the re-entrant. And we didn't know it at the time, but there was 21 there. There was 21 firing positions found by Charlie Warren and the other buggers that spent the night there. And as I said, one of the first rounds hit me, and it felt like I've been hit by a bus. I went over, and as I sort of did a sort of semi-somersault going backwards, I noticed the blood on my jumpsuit and on my hand and my arm. And I also remember when it hit, I just saw this white light. Anyway, so I rolled backwards to get out of the fire because it was like really intense. And as I was going backwards, I noticed my machine gunner, Andy Dawson, had been hit as well. He got shot through the arse. And no sooner had I stopped, then Gibbo came on the radio and said, look, Robbie Francis has been killed. And by then the fire died down because we had pulled back. And Bruce Nagel said, we must go and get Robbie Francis out. He saw him moving in the river. So he had just said that when Pugsley Gibson came back to me and said, no, he's dead. There's no way he moved in the river. So I said, okay, Gibbo, well, I've been, and I remember saying 3-9, this is Banana 5, I've been hit. And he said to me, how bad is it, Charlie? And I said, I'm fucked, but I've been hit in the head. Because I was feeling very sorry for myself at this stage of the game. Anyway, Gibbo came over to me and he said, don't worry, soldier, it's just your eye. Your eye's gone, but you're okay. So I said, well, great, put a field dressing on, which he did. And I said to him, Gibbo, make sure the guys are back. Let's reorganize this thing. So what we did is we called in an airstrike, and I think it was Ray Harkinson was the pilot. And he put in an airstrike. But when he put in the airstrike, he came over our heads. He didn't attack across our front. So he put in the airstrike, and funnily enough, the Fransam hit my rifle. So I left my rifle where I was hit, and it buggered up my rifle. And I was really pissed off about that because it was a short barrel left head. It was the barrel had been cut. It was it was my pride and joy. Anyway, after the airstrike, myself and Andy Dawson were casevaced to Darwin. The MRU was there. Major Webster was there. And that sister, Jess, her name was Jessica, I think, she was there. And as the chopper landed with us, it was actually dark. I remember it was dark. We got out and we were on like these medical bed type things, stretcher type things. And I remember Major Webster shining his torch in my eyes. And I said to him, "Hell, that's strange." I said, "When you're blind, is it like you lose a limb and still get the feeling? Because I can see light." So he says, "What are you talking about?" So I said, "Well, my eye's gone, isn't it?" So he says, "No, your eye's still there." So then I was really chuffed. So basically, the bullet just skimmed me and knocked out a bit of skull here above my right eye, and fractured the orbital, and I don't know what else it did. I remember Jack Thornton, who was adjutant at the time, he came to see us and just asked what happened. And basically, we were casevaced to Salisbury in an Islander, which had been flying around the country on a jolly with one of the brigadiers visiting troops. So he had to spend the night there, and the Islander took myself and Annie Dawson back to Andrew Fleming, or to Salisbury, then to Andrew Fleming. So that was that. I remember the hospital let us out to attend Robbie Francis's funeral. And then I hadn't had my operation at that stage, and I had to go back into Andrew Fleming for the op. So yeah, we went to his funeral. And funnily enough, John, I used to take his sister, Joy Francis, out. She was one of my ex-girlfriends. And to this day, we're still in touch with each other. She lives in Dubai. She married... both her names today. Joy. One commander said that got shot in the neck, man. Graham. I forget his name now. But yeah, so I was off on sick leave for about 2 or 3 weeks, I think. And then going back, I think, so that happened on the 10th of June. I think I went back to the commander in late July. And it wasn't long before we did Op Tepid, which, like you said, wasn't exactly tepid. We were on R&R when we got called out for that. I remember that. And we formed up at FAF, I think it was FAF 2 at Kariba.
Right.
And that's where we went in from. And we were just told that SAS were in the shit and they needed some help. And so yeah, we did Op Tepid, which was quite exciting. I remember the first day was called off because of low cloud cover. And so we had the day off, and I remember they had a swimming pool there at the FAF, and it was so bloody hot at Kariba. We just sat in the pool the whole day, drinking beer. Then when we went in the next day, 3 Commander Cornet had the Guma on the east, and 2 Commander had the Guma on the west. And there was like a flat ground in between the two where the camp was, on a slight, the camp was on each side of that flat pad. So 3 Commanders' target was on the east, 2 Commanders was on the west side. And we went in, I remember we went in by Bell helicopter. And as we landed, so we were obviously in an HD because they mortared us as we were dropped off. And SAS had a mortar position there as well. So exactly where we were dropped off, SAS had mortars, 81mm mortars, and we were mortared there by the Gooks at the same time. But although it was accurate, it wasn't sustained. So, they gave up after a while, and we crawled out of our re-entrance or wherever we were keeping the and started making our way towards the camp. At this stage, Dom Price was our OC, because obviously Bruce had died. And we made our way towards the camp, and we didn't have any idea that it was so well dug in. I remember 14 Troop and 12 Troop, I think, were going to give covering fire to 11 and 13 Troop, who were going to do the assault. And that's what happened, but the assault was short-lived because the amount of fire that the Gooks put down was unreal. There was just no ways that we could take it without some very heavy, more airstrikes or more guys or something. And then once Andy Horton was shot and killed, he was in the assault group, and I remember Bruce Kidd. I was with the covering fire group, but Bruce Kidd carried him to an LZ and away from the target area on his back, and I don't know how he got the strength because it was quite some distance away from where he was hit. And I remember he didn't die straight away, but it was soon after that he died. And then that night we pulled back and we slept out at probably about, I don't know, 800 meters to a K away from the camp. And they fired, I think it was 122 millimeter rockets at us during the night. And it's the first time I've experienced them. And all I remember is they made a hell of a big bang. Didn't do any damage, but made a hell of a noise. So we were all thinking, now we got to go back there tomorrow and do this all again. But as everybody knows, the Gooks pulled out that night. And I think there was about 300 of them. And when we swept the camp the next day, it was like something out of a First World War movie. They had proper trenches, proper bunkers, sandbags like we used to have, proper sandbags. They had field telephones. They had 12-7s, anti-aircraft weapons.
Oh, there was that controversial incident with Dave Greenhalgh, who...
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that, Charlie.
Basically, so Dave was back as IO at that stage, and so he was at the FAF, and I think they obviously anticipated that these buggers might gap it during the night, or more could join them. So they did a quick round robin, and they got a whole lot of bloody cooks and boiler washers too, because it was all the fit and able troops were in Zambia. So they got guys from like cooks and boiler washers to form this ambush. And I'm open to correction, but I seem to think Brian Lewis was in that ambush. I'll check with him, but anyway, so when these buggers started filing past, Dave just decided that he wasn't going to initiate the ambush. So
probably a wise decision.
Sorry?
Probably a wise decision considering how outnumbered he was.
Yeah, I don't know. I've thought about it a lot and thought, well, you know what? They could have opened up and just put out as much fire as they could for 10 seconds and then baleka out of there.
Yeah.
But it's different when you've got like 200 or 300 guys filing past you, and I think they had about 8 guys. They had no claymores. So it's the old story. The man on the ground makes the decision.
Yeah, I mean, I knew Dave Greenhalgh, and he struck me as a very competent
absolutely, yeah.
officer.
Yeah, no, he was a first class officer, and he was brave as well. He was brave too. I got to know him quite well because over the first elections, when Muzarewa got in, the commando split up, and 2 troops stayed with. It was 14, and I forget. I think it might have been 11 troop with us. We went to Beitbridge, first to Gwanda and then to Beitbridge, and the other 2 commandos were with Bruce Snellville in the Hurricane area, and we stayed at the sports club in Beitbridge. It was really nice. I remember at that stage I couldn't drink anything because I'd had hepatitis, so I was on 6 months no drinking. And I remember going up to the Bridge Motel every night and having vanilla ice cream. But Dave and I shared a tent, which was pitched on the cricket pitch. And I remember we used to go to bed at night and lay on our stretchers and talk until the early hours of the morning. And eventually he'd say, "Come on, let's go to sleep now." And then I'd say, remember something and start talking. He'd say, "Fuck off, go to sleep." Then what happened was we were quite successful down there. We had a few good call-outs. But Bruce now came and joined us. He came to see the other half of the commander. And him and Don Price were very, very close friends. And Don was in charge of the TF unit there. And I remember the one night Bruce Nagel went up to visit his mate Don Price. Obviously had a few too many jugs. And when he came back in his Land Rover, he drove straight into our tent. On purpose. I remember Dave wasn't just, but yeah, that was a funny incident. But then, yeah, after Op Tepid, basically, we went to Monopools to do like a border control type thing, because at that stage they were expecting a big invasion by Zipra. And it was great being there with Don Price because, you know, obviously his knowledge of game and the bush is second to none. But then from there, I went on Osby, on Officer Selection Board at Llewellyn. I passed that, and I can't, there's a gap of a couple of months. I can't remember what happened, if I was back in the commander. But to cut a long story short, I went on officer's course in January, early in January of 1980. And it was a POC course, and I was on that course for 6 months. And funny enough, here again, Johnny Norman was our course instructor. Yeah, it's a good bugger, Johnny. It really is. But yeah, so Johnny Norman and my paths crossed throughout my bloody army life. He was a first class instructor, and on my course, we had the likes of Martin Chukonda, but we had blacks on the course as well. Martin Chukonda was on our course. Kevin Slachter, the rugby player, was on our course. Mark Rousseau was on with us. Henry Van Furen, Rod Ellison. I think there was 17 or 18 of us started, and of that, 12 of us were commissioned. But it was quite nice because being trained soldiers, we didn't have to do the basics again, you know. So we went straight into the meat of it, and we got every weekend off as well. So I just got married. I, in fact, got married the day before I went on officer's course. So every weekend on a Friday, we'd drive back to Salisbury and then come back on Sunday night. Invariably, we had something to do over the weekend. We had to write an essay or do a fire plan or do something, which I'd always leave to the last minute and do it when I got back. I shared a room with Mike Rousseau on the course. And I remember the one weekend I got back and I hadn't done my essay. So I said to Mike, I said, look, let me lend yours, let me borrow yours, and let me get some idea of what's going on here, you know? So he said, no, sure. Anyway, so I did it, and we handed in our work the next day. And when we got our papers back, I got a B and he got a C. he wasn't tough. Yeah, and then, so that was officer's course, and we were fortunate enough to be posted to ROI. So we, you know, it was park courses prior to that one. Your chances of going back to ROI were just about zero, but they were really short of officers then. And another thing that happened on our officers course was that we were commissioned 6 weeks before we were due to be commissioned because of the elections. So we were commissioned, but we were still on course. So we still had to do the last phase of our course, but they didn't know what was going to happen after independence. So they brought our date forward. And then I went back to RLR and went to one commander where I stayed until the the very end. Then after that, another interesting time was I stayed with a handful of guys to start one commando battalion, which was made up of a third former army, a third Cipra, and a third Zanda. And I was adjutant initially, and it was really interesting because basically my feelings. I'm not. I don't know how to put this, but for me the war was over, and so let's just get on with whatever's going to take place now. So I wasn't. I didn't have hatred towards these buggers, and it was quite interesting talking to them, and you could actually work out with some of them that you'd actually had contacts with them. When I say them, I don't mean millions, but certain incidents where you were at a certain location and you had a contact, and they were at that same location. I remember the one guy's name was Donny Chidawanika, and he was a hell of a nice guy. So basically what the task there was, out of this third, to start a battalion from CO down. So that you choose from the CO through all the company commanders, 2 RCs, troop or as they're called, company officers, down to the NCOs. So right, they had to appoint all these different buggers. And they did a selection course as well, which was, there's a game, a reserve near Mount Darwin. I can't remember its name. A game reserve. When I say game reserve, it's not renowned for its game, but it was government ground, and they did the selection there. Initially, Nick Fawcett was the CO, and then he moved on, and Ian Buttonshaw took over as CO of World Commando Battalion. But the most interesting thing that happened there was when I was adjutant as well, at which time I was living in married quarters at Orala with my newborn son and Tanya. And one night, somebody came and scaled all the weapons from the armories. I think from 3 armories, it might have been 4. But they didn't break any doors or do any damage. They obviously had keys. And they cleaned out 3 armories, 100%, took everything. And as far as I know, to this day, nobody knows who did it or why or what the weapons were used for or where they went. I never heard another word about it.
Sure. As adjutant, did you have any egg on your face from that, Charlie?
Yeah. But because it was so surreal, I personally felt that way. But nobody held anything against me because the security there was like it was with Oralawa there. You had a bugger patrolling the magazine on guard. You had a few guys in the guard room at the gate and on the boom there. Nobody at the back gate. And yeah, so certainly I felt, yes, I did have egg on my face, but I was never pulled over the coals for it. But yeah, I was obviously the person who was accountable for it. But as I said, they had keys, John. They didn't break they didn't break anything. They in and out, and with the amount of weapons, maybe they could have fitted on 1 vehicle, maybe 2. I don't know.
Yeah, Charlie is that, yeah.
Sorry. No, we also had quite a bit of fun with one commando battalion because maybe this is why I was sent from being adjutant to become training officer. So then you weren't training officer, you were OC training company, the new structure. And one of the things we had to do was to teach the company commanders how to do KCAR commanding. And one commando battalion had taken over Waffa Waffa as well from the scouts. So basically, what I would do is I would phone up 7 Squadron and say to the guys, listen, do you guys want to go on a jolly to Kariba? And of course, I knew what the answer, of course I did, And I'd organised for whatever exercise was being done to be done from Waffa Waffa, and the blue jobs would be there as well. And when we flew to Waffa Waffa, the chopper used to pick me up on the soccer field behind my back fence. So I suggested to the wife, jump over the fence and get on the chopper and get flown to Kariba. You know, stuff that as a civvy you'd pay an arm and a leg for. I remember Ken Blaine, one of the chopper pilots, flying about. He had his windsurfer strapped to the skegs. So it was something like out of Apocalypse Now, you know. And it was fantastic. We'd go and do what we had to do at Waffa Waffa. But then at about 4:30 every afternoon, we would jump on the choppers, fly up to the Indian company where they would leave the choppers, organize a driver to take us down to Caribbean Bay, spend the night in the casino there, go back, sleep at one of the croupiers, well, the croupier's shared house. In the morning, first thing, on the choppers, fly back to Waffa Waffa and carry on with whatever we were doing. It was great. After that, not after that, but during that phase, there was talk. They were talking about deploying one commander battalion to go help Frelimo against Renamo, and I thought, no, that's not for me. I'm not getting involved in this. So I left, and I went to Pretoria to apply to join the South African Army, and was interviewed there for a day. Was accepted, but the wife said, if you're going to join the army down there, I'm not coming with you. So I left and I went back and joined Old Mutual again. And that was it.
Okay.
The best years of my life.
Yeah. Gosh, Charlie, I really appreciate your time, brother, and the interesting stories. And it's really good to see you up and about again. But yeah, thank you very much, Charlie. I really enjoyed that.
No, thank you, John. It was great. Thanks very much.